Well, hi there. My name is Sandy Allnock. I'm an artist and paper crafter, and today we're doing Brusho in Space.
And now another malodorous episode of Pigs in Space!
As I was working on this, I just kept having that little Muppet Show thing run through my head. When I was a kid, they always had Pigs in Space. That's a trailer for one of the newer episodes, so it's a little fancier than it used to be when I was a kid, but we're going to do Brusho in Space today. Brusho is a watercolor powder. It comes in these little jars, and I'll have a video at the end of this where you can see how I made my little toppers for my jars and stuff and get more information on the product. But basically it's a powder, and when you put water down, it will move just within that water. If you put it on dry paper, you should be able to just blow it off with your breath and get rid of it. I wouldn't use anything to brush it off unless you're really careful, because you don't want to smush that pigment into the paper. But I'm going to be doing a background around this. I just wanted to color my images all first. One of the things I really like about Brusho is that it retains some of that granular look. So as I go through this, I'm going to leave that granular look. I'm going to leave some white spots, some white areas, that sort of thing. I don't want it to be all perfect, because why would I do it with Brusho if I'm not gonna let it kind of let the medium sing as it is. So I'm moving it around with my brush. I'm also using I think this is a number 8 brush, might be a number 10, but I think it's number 8. And I do find myself using larger and larger brushes lately, just so you know. That is just a thing that I do. So you can see I'm just painting on different sections with water and then adding powder on. You can do a couple sections at a time if you're prepared to just get them all going at once, or you can just do one shape at a time and start spreading that color around, and little by little get the whole thing done. When I do my Brusho, I often do loose paintings in order to loosen up before using regular watercolor, because Brusho does what it wants to do, but this is one of those techniques that you can use to make it a very controlled type of thing. And you do need to remember that when you get a little bit of that pigment outside of it, if it gets wet, you are going to pick up a little bit of that color. We're going to see a few areas in this where I have some issues with that, but in general it's not going to bother me for the whole card. Here I use 2 different yellows. Lemon yellow is the main yellow, and then I went back to some of that gamboge, which is of course one of the prettiest colors in Brusho, so that I could get a little differentiation in color on 2 sides. And you also notice, like, a couple times I'm dabbing off color, because that will it'll help it dry faster, and it also stops that movement right away. Now here I'm painting something right next to an area that had yellow in it, so I'm going to get a little yellow accidentally into my helmet. I'm not too worried about that. Just going to let it go. I just want to make sure that I don't get too much in there. So when you're putting your color on, if there are areas where you're really not happy with any of that color getting into another area, just be real careful what you touch it to, because this stuff remains wettable afterward. So if you sneeze on your card when it's all done, the color will move again. So no sneezing on your card. But here you can see I tapped a little bit onto the piece of tape there. And I tapped it onto the tape because then I can pick that color up, just add some water to it and water it down as much as I need to, or add more pigment if I want to have it a little heavier in color. And just put a little bit of that gray into his spacesuit. The thing that I'm working on, the surface, the black surface that I'm working on, is my Ellen Hudson Craft Assistant. And that is a metal 12 by 12 sheet of metallic stuff that is super easy to clean up. However, if you're going to tap a little bit on to make a palette for yourself, you can't see the color. You can't really see how much you have there. So that's why I do it on the tape next to it. But I like to use the Craft Assistant when I'm using my Brusho, just because it does get sometimes everywhere, especially if you're going to blow some of that color off like I do. Then you want something that's going to catch it. Don't let it get all over your desk, or you could have some issues. So here I'm just painting in a couple different layers. I've added more pigment to my little puddle so I can make it a little darker gray, and as it's drying slightly I can add more layers to it, and the water and the color that's underneath is going to help it to blend in a little bit and move that color around and make this look as dimensional as I want it to. Just add a little bit on top of my helmet. And now we're going to speed up because we could be here all day if I don't. So I'm going to add some pink to one of the balloons. And again, I'm going to allow the Brusho to just be sort of loose and smushy all over the place, not really stressing out about trying to fill in every square inch. And you'll see when the card is done, it has a very loose feel to it, even though this is a very controlled technique. There's a little spot there where on that planet at the bottom, I have some pigment that went outside of it. I am going to be doing that background. So some of that pink pigment will blend into the black background. There's not really a way to lift that entirely once you make that goober. So bear that in mind, that you may need to do some recovery work. But if you're going to do a background like I'm going to be doing with a loose kind of spacey sky, then you don't have to worry about it all that much. So I'm going to finish off all of these images. I wanted to add a little bit more to the top there because I got a little of the red at the top of that planet. Didn't like how it wouldn't mush around. So I just added a little bit more of the gamboge on top. So you can play around with this and adjust it and add more colors to things and blend them out to be a little smoother if you want to, or add a little roughness to them, whatever way you want it to come out, because this stuff is really fun to play with. A few more finishing touches here. I'm going to clean up the planet and add a little bit to it. I didn't like quite how much my little balloon had on it, and then I thought since I had a little bit of this pink pigment, I'd add a little bit also to the space suit. Do that. Now the face, I didn't want to have a lot of granularity on, so I made sure that I mixed my paint on the tape so that I don't end up getting big old grains of pigment on his little face. And you see how nicely that came out. That was sandstone, was that color. I'll have all of the colors listed on my blog, so if you need to know what these colors are, I will let you know over there, because they are not in my head as I'm doing this voiceover. Now the gray color, which is related to the black, so I've used the black in a lot of my Brusho videos before. The gray is just a lighter version of it. You still get a lot of that color breakout, but here I'm trying to get a base coat of kind of this really light gray first. And I wanted it to be really, really light and then add more to it. So I added a little bit by sprinkling off, and then a lot of it I'm adding using the brush and picking up pigment. Here I've got a lot of water on my brush so I can soften it out a whole lot, and just spreading that color around until it looks like I have a little shadow underneath the mission control sign. And then I want to add a little bit more at the very base, because my sky, I want to have that planet, that's just a little line that I've drawn around it, that little arc, because I wanted to create this scene of having a planet down below. And the mission control sign, by the way, I drew that onto here. I stamped my sentiment and then just drew a little box around it. The next step is putting glossy accents over all of the parts that I've already colored, because I want them to remain those colors and have a little more freedom when I'm painting the background. And when you do this, you want to let it dry all the way, because guess what? If you get dry pigment on wet glossy accents, it's going to stick. So this is after it dried. I let it dry for a couple hours because I wanted to make sure it was really good and dry. And you can see there's some yellow out in the sky there. Just picked up on my brush. Some of it might have been from my water because I hadn't cleaned it. And some of it might be from just pigment that was touching outside of those. But I'm going to be putting enough color down. I'm not going to worry about it too much. And here's where you can see putting some of these colors out here. I'm going to use some violet and some cobalt blue. And you can see how fun they come out when you're just sprinkling them. I've sprinkled them with water that's just been painted on. You can spritz all over it, but I wasn't as confident that I had really covered all of those areas around each one of my planets and everything completely with the glossy accents. I just wasn't confident that I had done that well. So if you're confident, then you could spritz all over it, but I felt better just doing this with a brush and moving the color around. And you can see as I go, I have a little less control in some areas, a little more in others, depending on whether I want that spotty kind of granular look at the top. And it softens as it sits in the water too. So I'm making sure I keep it nice and wet. But down toward the planet, I want to have lighter color. So I'm going to pull down a little bit of that color. So as we go, it's just going to be a soft bluish purple down by the planet, and the dark is going to be up in the sky. So I'll sprinkle a little bit more and start spreading it around. And all of that area is still wet, so all of it's going to be able to move and be re-wet. But if you let it dry too much, then you may end up with some hard spots of blue. But I'm going to keep getting that sky darker and darker. I did do this one time before, and I tried to go all dark the first time around without doing it in layers like this, and it was really hard to control. I ended up with almost blackish spots. So I found this was a much easier way to go when I did it the second time. Learn from what I have made my mistakes with. So you can see I'm spreading that color down. I'm getting a little bit darker blue toward the bottom, but I'm not going too heavy yet because it's just, like I said, really easy to get too dark too fast. And so I wanted to keep my options open to see how dark and how light I wanted it to be. All that area is still wet, so now when I pour that color in there, I'm able to really get it to move around really nicely and start to get a much better gradation from that bluish purple all the way down to the other colors, the lighter colors down toward the horizon line. And I'm just picking up color that's already on my brush so I can get some of that pinkish purple color down there, and a little bit that oversprayed when I shook my purple the last time. Put a little bit more in here. I think that might have been shaking on a little bit of that pink color as well. And spread that out a little further. You can see how wet the paper is because all of that color, every time I tap that brush, it just keeps moving. I'm doing this on Arches cold pressed paper, so if you're using other papers, it may or may not move the same way. So I like it on this kind of paper because the texture of the paper itself and the rag content in it moves the color around in really beautiful ways. And you can see here I'm just going over it with enough layers and keep tapping in more colors that now I've got this gorgeous sky when it all dried. Isn't that beautiful? How fun that came out. It looks like he's just totally flying above the ground, and the color lightens up as it gets down to the bottom, but it's nice and solid up at the top because I built it up in those layers, and I used a Signo pen, white gel pen, to make those little dots for the sky. So here you go, a couple more videos. That one that I promised about doing the caps on the Brusho bottles. There's also another Brusho video there for you. You can click on my face in order to get a subscription to my channel, and I will talk to you guys later. Thanks.